My name is Elias Redstone, and I'm the Artistic Director of Photo 2021 International Festival of Photography. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Boonwurrung and Wiradjuri peoples of the Great Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, and I pay my deep respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So we are here today for the first in-person Photo Live. Photo Live is a series of artist conversations looking at the social and cultural implications of photography. And this series that we are presenting in partnership with MPavilion during Photo 2021 features a number of festival artists who are all presenting work in the public realm, occupying public spaces, unexpected sites around the city, to look at their work and explore the ideas that are presented within their festival programs. So I'm delighted this evening to be joined by two festival artists, Brooke Andrew and Kate Golding, who I'm incredibly honored to be, have had the opportunity to work with in delivering Photo 2021, and you'll be hearing more about them and from them shortly. But we are being hosted this evening, and we'll be in conversation with the artists, is Clare Wright. Clare Wright, Professor Clare Wright OAM, is an award-winning historian, author, broadcaster, and public commentator who has worked in politics, academia, and the media. Clare is currently a Principal Research Fellow and ARC Future Fellow at La Trobe University. She's the author of 4 works of history, including the best-selling The Forgotten Rebels of Eureka, winner of the 2014 Stella Prize, and You Daughters of Freedom. Clare's writing has appeared in The Guardian, The Conversation, The Age, amongst other media, and she hosts the ABC Radio National History Series, Shooting the Past, and co-hosts the La Trobe Uni podcast, Archive Fever. Thank you very much to MPavilion and the team for making this happen today, and to Creative Victoria for supporting this program and keeping it free for everyone to join in. Please join me in a round of applause to welcome our guests today, and I hand over to Clare. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elias, and good evening to all of you, and welcome to Photo Live. As Elias said, this is a series of artist talks associated with the Photo 21 International Festival of Photography, and it's very exciting to say that Photo Live is actually live, not virtually live. I was saying to my sister in the car on the way in that this is the first in-person event that I've done since March last year. So that is a real testament to Melbourne and what we've been through, and to Photo Live for getting this up. It almost looked like it was going to stall at the last hurdle with that little lockdown, but here we all are. So actually live and also live streaming. So welcome to all of you who are joining us via the Facebook live stream as well. I too would like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting here this evening in Naarm, Melbourne, on stolen lands of the Wiradjuri and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and to acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any other First Nations people who might be joining us in the audience here tonight. Thank you for letting me live and work on your beautiful land. So to introduce myself just a little bit further, as Elias said, I'm Clare Wright. I'm a Professor of History at La Trobe University, and I want to say off the bat that I have no particular expertise in art history and no experience as a professional photographer. But I do host the Radio National history podcast, Shooting the Past, which uses historical photographs as an avenue into storytelling and textual analysis. And I'm also the co-convener of a grassroots activist campaign called A Monument of One's Own, which is a campaign for statue equality for women. And you'll see over the course of our session tonight why monumental change is needed and why monuments themselves become sites of contestation. I only recently learned from Boonwurrung man Garen Steele Briggs that the Woiwurrung word womanjeka, which we become quite used to hearing, which is generally translated as welcome, actually means welcome, what is your purpose? And this knowledge, that idea of purposely walking onto country, has really changed the way that I think about a lot of things. And so tonight I'd like to use that question to frame our event. What is the purpose of us coming here together tonight? So broadly speaking, we're here to celebrate and investigate the photographic work of these two marvellous artists who I'm going to introduce in a moment. And more generally, we're here to interrogate the central theme of Photo 21, which is the truth. As the festival program announces, in a time of global pandemic, swathed in fake news, disputed elections and artificial intelligence, there has never been a more important time to launch an international festival of photography that specifically examines the truth. So with that in mind, let me introduce our artists tonight. Kate Golding, to my immediate right, is a Melbourne-based settler Australian artist whose work examines colonisation and representation of people and place through lens-based and alternative photographic processes. Kate was awarded an Art Start grant from the Australia Council for the Arts and was the winner of a Lyndon Postcard Prize and a CCP, the Centre for Contemporary Photography, Salon Best Work by a CCP member prize. Her work features in Melbourne Museum's permanent exhibition First Peoples, and her Photo 2021 commission was supported by a City of Melbourne Arts grant. Her photo book, Within You, Without You, was published in 2015, and for Photo 21, Kate is exhibiting a work called Near This Spot, which actually is near this spot where we are now. It's just up the end of the road, and I encourage you to go and have a look at it after you leave here. It's in Gordon Reserve on Spring Street, as I say, just up on the corner. And in a moment, we'll hear from Kate about this work. And to Kate's right is Brooke Andrew. Brooke is a Wiradjuri Celtic artist who has exhibited internationally since 1996. His interdisciplinary practice critically examines dominant narratives related to global histories of colonialism and modernity. Through museum and archival interventions, Brooke offers alternate visions of images and objects and different means of interpreting history in the world today. Apart from drawing inspiration from vernacular objects and the archives, he travels internationally, well, he used to work with different communities, as well as various private and public collections. Brooke is Associate Professor of Fine Art at Monash University. He's the Artistic Director of Niran, the 22nd Biennale of Sydney, and he's represented by Tolano Galleries in Melbourne and Rosalind Oxley 9 in Sydney and other places as well, including internationally. For Photo 21, Brooke is exhibiting Smash It, an outdoor video installation located in Paran Square in Cato Street, Paran. So if you are going to be on that side of town, I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that work as well. So the way that we're going to do this tonight is that Brooke is going to show you some of his work and talk to it briefly. Kate is going to do the same, and then I'm going to question them more broadly about their practice and some of the themes that arise from it. So over to you, Brooke.
Thank you very much. Ngaujingang and Daraga means I see you, so I'd like to acknowledge everyone here today. Thank you, Elias and the team from my mother's family, for example, representations of them, a lot of them of unknown photographs. Now, the reason why I say that is because when we look at histories and when I myself look at the way in which I'm constructing my own history or how we look forward, it's often through invisibility or a kind of an orphan kind of look at ancestry. Some of us weren't so lucky to be photographed and named by people like Persch, for example, who was a Viennese anthropologist and photographer who came to Australia around the birth of photography and documented the Grafton community. And every Aboriginal person had their name written, which is incredibly rare. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is we're looking at a monument, which is not a photograph, but you'll see that there is a drawing in one of the banners at the back there. That's either Tenaminaway or Moi Bahina. Now, this is important, and I'm sure that we'll come back to it later, But I created this work with Trent Walter, a collaborator. You'll see Annie Carolyn there and a whole bunch of people. This work was made in 2016, but the most humbling thing about being able to, the privilege of being able to work with this mixed community around the presentation and I suppose delivering some marker for Tēnā Minawai and Moibahina was to make their own invisibility and their histories that they really strove for visible. And Tēnā Minawai and Moibahina were the first two Aboriginal people, or first two people to be hung in Melbourne in 1841 and, in 1842. They were convicted in 1841 for the murder of two whalers in Tasmania. There's a long story to that and it's contested. But the pride on a lot of these community people's faces just to finally be acknowledged was such a great achievement for them. So this really goes to, next is, I have a little video of the work Smash It. Now, I suppose the reason why I wanted to show Standing by Moibahina and and Moibahina first is because when I often think about monuments or the lack of monuments to the frontier wars, we were lucky that that monument was pushed through from the Melbourne Council. And I think it's probably one of the very few or only monuments to the frontier wars supported by public money. Of course, there's lots of discussion now. Everyone wants to do the right thing for, hopefully good places in the future that we can visit. But something for me is I'm always looking internationally. I'm really interested in this kind of comparison to international documentation, to evidence, and a lot of course, this is through photography. So I'll show you a little bit, like just a few minutes of Smash It. You can see the whole thing over in a shipping container that we've skinned with exactly that text I said before, Ngajingang and Daraga. So it's really about the act of looking, which of course photography is. Just a little bit about this film. It goes for about 15 minutes. Here I'm only going to show a few minutes. But it also has collaged into it the film Jetta, that you probably know, the Charles Chauvel film. So I'll just play that. Is that not the film? Hang on, sorry. This is the one. Cut within this is, I've interviewed 4 different people. One of them is Marcia Langton. It's in French because it was exhibited in Switzerland. Oh, can we have some sound on that, please?
It's up on the computer.
That would be a nice world to live in, wouldn't it? I think that's the purpose of rules. And so we carry on about rules in order to be more politically correct than thou, or to put other people down, or to decrease access. We're making only traditional owners who reside in an area are allowed to do research. Everybody else has to get permission from the tribal council. And, the tribal council maybe meets once every 6 months. So how feasible is it to have these crazy rules that actually don't benefit anybody? What's the benefit of this?
Who am I and how do I define myself?
So there you go. It's very quick. So I made this work when I was at the Smithsonian in the US when I was traveling a few years ago. And it was really kind of working with their archive, but also found footage archive. It's also, a really great way to explore what are monuments? How is it that we engage in them? what kind of protocols are there around representation? And we were talking before about, well, what is a monument anyway? Does it have to be a plinth? Does it have to be, a statue sitting on it? Like, how is it that we kind of comment and interpret these? And of course, the recent looking at, the Confederate kind of statues overseas, and then people are looking at the statues here. When the Biennale was on March, April last year, those of you probably saw there's a lot of people, the police were standing around the Captain Cook statue there. So this is, many years after making this work, but for me, it's definitely about the kind of vandalisation of not only the physical monument, but what does it do to us and our bodies, and how is it that we can actually create a different society?
Terrific, Brooke, and we'll go back and we'll explore some of those themes more and those questions that you yourself have raised. But let's have a look at Kate's work now. Kudos to you guys for being able to control the technology there as well. Very impressed.
Hi, I'm Kate Golding. I'm a settler Australian artist of Anglo background. And I mention that again after Claire mentioned it because I think it's important to state my position with this work, where I'm coming from. It began in 2012 when I went to Kealakekua in the Kingdom of Hawaii and saw the monument to where Captain Cook was killed. So that's, as Claire mentioned, the name of the project is near this spot. It's been going since 2012. It began as a documentary photography project, and then I began using more alternative processes to reference, as Brooke was talking about, the beginnings of photography, and to try and unravel that enmeshment of colonisation and photography and how the two are connected. So for Photo 2021, I've made, just to mention, this is on the left is the statue in Whitby in the UK, and on the right is the statue in Waimea on Kauai in Hawaii. And that we also are lucky enough to have a replica of that down at Wiradjuri, which is St Kilda. And I say lucky sarcastically.
Hey, can I just clarify that the seagull was just spontaneous? That's not part of the sculpture itself.
The seagull was, doing his business on top of Captain Cook. Whitby is where Captain Cook did his apprenticeship, or began his life as a mariner in the Merchant Marines. And so this statue looks out over the harbour in Yorkshire in England. So for Photo 2021, I started photographing the monuments again, and then also began again bringing in these alternative processes. So on the left, there's a photograph that I made in January last year when the smoke was all blanketing the city down at Wiradjuri, and I collected those at the bottom. There were burnt leaves, and as you would know, there was no bushfires near here, but there was burnt leaves washing up on the shore down there. And I was thinking about the First Nation narratives of how as Cook was sailing up the east coast in 1770, that smoke was being used to message to the next nation that something was happening, someone was coming, and then, almost, not quite, but almost to the day of when the 250th anniversary was meant to be happening, the east coast of Australia was ablaze again, but for different reasons. Some more alternative processes. This one, the lava rock that's on Kauai as well, that's Lucy Wright Beach Park, which is actually the first place where Cook stepped ashore in Hawaii, but they've named it after the first Kanaka Maoli teacher, first Native Hawaiian teacher, school teacher. So there's no reference to him there, and there was a plaque, but apparently it's been removed by somebody. And then this works are made using a process called anthotype, which is using plant juice to sensitise paper. So I brought in, if someone wanted to have a look, it's some warrigal greens from my garden. I used warrigal greens from my garden that I grew for this project, and then juiced it and sensitised the paper, and then I went to Cook's Cottage down at Fitzroy Gardens and picked some samples and made the photograms. And also in that bottom right is the some ivy, which is on the cottage down there, which was a cutting that was actually taken from the original cottage when it was in England. That's where the cottage was in England, in Great Ayton, in Yorkshire. And this is actually a strange monument because it's a replica of one that's out at Point Hicks, out on Gunai Kurno country. And it's the first place that apparently Cook or Lieutenant Hicks, I think, saw the east coast of this continent. And so this monument actually says things on it like it's in Australia, but it's not in Australia, so it's quite confusing monument, and it's made from stone taken from there. So it was kind of this exchange that happened. We got Cook's Cottage in Australia, and then they got some stone from that Gunai Kurno country and made their own replica monument. And you'll see, if you go and see the work, there's this really big lumen print, which is seaweed that I collected down at Euroke. And I guess talking about what you guys have already mentioned, or what we were speaking about before, like what is a monument? Does it have to be this thing made of stone, or can it be a plant? What can it be? Open our minds to what it can be.
Great, again, ending on questions that we can explore further. Thank you both. Kate, I'll start with you. You've written in your artist statement that the artworks in this project, which we've seen now, have been developed in response to notions of unlearning Eurocentric colonial narratives in order to encourage discourse into unrepresented First Nations histories and narratives. I'm really fascinated by that idea of unlearning. So can you explain that a bit more, what it means to you, and how your photography helps us in this unlearning process?
It's a really great question. So the unlearning process began when I was doing my MFA at the VCA. I started not long before I began the masters. I had to have hip surgery, and so when I started the masters, I was on crutches and I couldn't go out and take photographs anymore. I couldn't carry my camera gear, so I started going back into my own archive of images that I'd been shooting since 2012 of the monuments, and that's how I started scratching the monuments and trying to alter the negatives and through that process, unlearning this history that I felt that I had been taught, as most of us have, if we went to school here in Australia, particularly in the 80s or earlier, we were told certain things, and there's a big gap. So I felt cheated, I felt like if I could unlearn that Eurocentric history, then that opened up space to learn narratives, or the non-dominant narratives that were actually more compelling to me and more interesting and gave a more holistic whole picture rather than just the white history.
So actually physically scratching away at the surface, that's a really wonderful image in itself, to explore that idea of much more broadly unlearning those narratives. And Brooke, you too, you use archival fragments and collaging techniques, and through doing so, as we've seen, you're also suggesting a deconstructing process and unpicking and unravelling. And you similarly quite consciously seek to destabilise that positioning of a dominant Australian colonial narrative and history. So can you tell me when you first became aware that the prevailing story needed a serious reboot?
Oh, there's lots of lots of moments. I think the first one, I was like 6, and my Aboriginal grandparents had wooden spoons, on the wall, and they had little Aboriginal heads on them. I thought that was weird, but it was just what we grew up with, lots of Aboriginal kitsch. And the other one is when it's totally left of field here, but it really had a big impact on me. My biology teacher told me when I was 13 that Aboriginal people have swirls on their thumbs, and I went home and told my mum, and she laughed at me. So, I mean, from a very young age, I think that regardless where you're from as an Indigenous person in Australia, regardless what your mixed heritage is, doesn't matter what it is, as soon as people know who you are something else. So even as an artist coming into the art world, I mean, for me, it was all like, I call it the colonial whole. And I write about this as a scholar, and I talk about the mess of colonialism. But it's not just colonialism, it's about how we construct our lives, how we continue to tell ourselves stories. And I think stories are very important for us, but I think they have to be the right stories. And it's really great what you were saying, Kate, about, well, people, use terminologies like decolonisation, sovereignty, and many, many different ways to kind of activate these. Everyone has their own path. But I think as an artist, I'm working on a theatre script at the moment, which will be the graduate students at the VCA will use, and that will have a bit of photography in it. So for me, more broadly, I'm interested in the mess. It may not be an answer, but I think that it is a mess, and the quicker we see that it's a mess, it will free us, to create our own stories or to look at what you said before, Claire, as the truth.
And Kate, so interesting, the notion of the truth in relation to your work, because Cook's cottage itself has nothing. I mean, Cook never lived in that cottage, so generations of school kids have been taken on excursions to see a cottage that's named after a man who never in fact lived in the cottage. And then again, you're saying with that monument that it's using stone that has from another place. So how do you think that photography, which is a medium which purports to tell the truth because it is sort of scientifically documenting something, can actually help us to see past those preconceived notions?
I can just speak to my own personal use of photography. I think that if you go and see the work, you'll see that I've mixed documentary as well as alternative processes, because I feel like one needs the other to explain each other. It's not a documentary image is a lie, it's not. It's just one standpoint. It's one viewpoint. Sorry, it's not a whole story. So. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's just unpack that notion of decolonisation. You've both used that word. It is a fashionable word in academic discourse at the moment. Brooke, as an academic yourself, you would be familiar with its impact and the problems with its usage as well. Some people prefer anti-colonialism to decolonising. I want to ask you whether First Nations and settler Australians are equally entitled, indeed obliged, to engage in this decolonising project, or are there protocols which settler artists must follow in order to be true allies, which clearly Kate wants to be. She's declared her settler status a couple of times now. And if I can go a bit further, I'm thinking here of Evelyn Aralewin's essay in Overland of a couple of years ago. where she interrogated the campaign to rename the Wentworth building at Sydney Uni. It was part of that Roads Must Fall, that whole time where we started to be very aware of the true identities behind some of the names of these places and the way that they'd been commemorated and memorialised. And Evelyn argued that those who don't have a lived experience of oppression can't, for all their good intentions, truly engage in the radical program of anti-colonialism from within the safe confines of colonial institutions like universities and, by extension, galleries and museums as well. So I'm interested in your take on this. Is photography ultimately a tool of colonisation, or can it truly be turned on the oppressor?
I think that's 6 questions now.
Sorry.
Look, I'm not going to tell anyone what to do. People do what they want to do, right? You know, I come from a mixed cultural background, you know, and I think that we've all grown up in the same mess, or if you're, you know, new here or come here whenever you came here, I mean, you know, the world's all pretty screwed up anyway. And I take that, you know, as a very serious position. I mean, my work and my travels and my collaborations internationally, I mean, you know, you think Australia's got it bad, go to Rio. I mean, you know, it's all pretty bad. I think there's a problem with the word decolonial because often, you know, because of Walter Manolo, even though he says that he was the one who discovered, of course, other people have been playing with this for a while. And I think that what you're touching on before about is really a sense of privilege, you know, who really has a sense of, you know, privilege, what can we see, what can't we see? For example, I know that there's a forum coming up and it is around, it's looking at Indigenous design methodologies, 5 people, 1 Indigenous person on it. I don't know if you'd have, you know, women, you know, methodologies and have 4 men and 1 woman. So I think, you know, we have the answers ourselves when it comes to anything like that. I mean, I think I really want to do now is really to talk about the pantomimes, you know. So if we're looking at histories, I think, you know, the way I translate your questions are, what are we doing with this stuff, right? Are we believing it? Are we taking our kids to the Captain Cook, you know, hut and saying, hey, he lived there? I mean, this is a complete theatre, right? And I think that regardless if it's photography or not, it is theatre. And it's about really who has access to those tools. Sure, as Aboriginal people, we have access to those photos, but we've got our own protocols. I mean, we're dying within our own protocols. You know, I've been an artist for 30 years now, and when Terry Jenke, the Aboriginal lawyer, and I started looking at, okay, what are the protocols around using photography, artists like Ree, and others, Lee King Smith, we were negotiating the kind of discovery for ourselves about what these photos meant for us. Like my grandmother or mother never even knew these photos existed. But then you got to a certain point where we aren't even supposed to use them then. So I think that we've got our own mess. You know what I mean? I think that Aboriginal people often always have to kind of think, oh, okay, we have to save someone else. Doesn't mean that there can't be collaborations. And I think that's where the answer is. It's about people working together.
And Kate, you've worked in this collaborative mode before. I'm interested in an exhibition that you mounted about 10 years ago called Aboriginalities, yeah? And you took portraits of First Nations subjects, but then you asked them to make the selection of which photograph was actually exhibited and also what they wanted to say about that image. And so how and why did you hit on that methodology?
You're good. I did that in my undergrad, so that was a number of years ago, and I was looking at a lot of the ethnographic photography that Brooke mentioned before, and that was taken by white, predominantly men, Europeans, who were taking these photos and then sending them back to the motherland, you know, as evidence of what they were seeing here, and so. I will say I think that project was a great start for me, but it was problematic in its own way in terms of the methodology that I used, because even though I did my best to make it a collaboration, it was still of my design. It was still something that I was taking to the Negara Willan, I think, centre at RMIT, and said, does anyone want to do this portrait project, and people were willing to do it. People wanted to participate, but it was still something that I came up with rather than them coming to me. And and some of those portraits have ended up in the First Peoples exhibition at Bunjalaka, Melbourne Museum. So I'm really, in some ways, proud of that work, but I also think that it was problematic. And I will say that I had done that work just before I went to Hawaii, and then just after I saw the death monument at Kealakekua, I was in a nearby town and I met some Kanaka Māori men who were tending to a heiau in that area, and they started talking to me about, we were just talking about Captain Cook, and they had said to me so many things that I had heard First Nations people, there was parallels between what they were saying and what I'd heard here in Australia, and that was the point where I realised, wow, this guy's had a huge influence. And I'm not trying to say that Indigenous people's experiences are the same across the world, but it was just that it was, for me, that was like a light bulb moment where I thought, oh, okay, we've got to unpack this guy, unlearn him, And I felt that for me, as someone with English ancestry, I felt qualified to do that. I could definitely make fun of him if I wanted, or it felt like that was maybe not qualified, maybe that's not the right word, but I felt that I could do it.
That's why I was checking about the seagull, was just to see whether you had put him on there because you were making fun of the guy. Cook is interesting because we kind of claim him as ours, like he's a good Aussie bloke like Bradman or Barlap or something. But obviously he belongs to the rest of the world. He is an Englishman and he went to other places and did stuff in other places as well. And Brooke, I'm interested that your Smash It project clearly has global resonance as well. Its imagery, as we've seen, draws from moments of statue removal and desecration all over the world and throughout the 20th century. There was some Holocaust stuff there as well. I'm interested to know to what extent you think the American Black Lives Matter movement, particularly what we saw in the protests of 2020, in the way that that's captured the imagination of the mainstream public. Is that a boon for your art?
I don't know if it's a boom for my art, but I think that what it means for our communities is very important, because it's interesting how, it takes our obsession with the USA, the disastrous democracy that it is, and also it's a really great place too. It's this kind of knife edge. It brings this kind of visibility to Indigenous Lives Matter and what it means for us here. And the extraordinary incarceration rate of our families. But it also, often overshadows Indigenous people in the Americas as well. I think it's a complicated democracy, and I think that it has influenced a lot of artwork around the world. But I think that there still needs to be a focus on an internationalism of monuments, or, this kind of theme, photography, everything more kind of generally.
And I'm interested that you used the work that you're showing in this, in Photo 2021, is a video installation. So can photography, stills photography, can it capture the heat and anger and the intensity of a movement like Black Lives Matter in equal kind of measure as video does? Like the images that we've seen of those statues being actually physically ripped and torn down and thrown into rivers, how do you, can photography preserve the moment in a way that moving pictures cannot? But can moving pictures capture an intensity that still photos cannot? How do you use video installation?
I don't know. I don't think there's much difference between photography and video personally. Photography and video have been around, or film has been around for a long time as well, and it's all the documentation process. They're really good questions. But I think for me, it is about a smash it. It's about smashing it all up together. And I think that it also puts us on the spot. It's looking at you know, the Taliban and ISIS destroying those thousands of years old monuments, yet Rio Tinto, you know, destroys a monument and, you know, a sacred place that's, 40,000 years. I mean, where it's incongruent, it doesn't make sense, it's out of balance, it's out of kilter, you know, and I think that that's what Smash It is for me, regardless of, even if it's photography or if it's film or how those things are smashed together. I think that, for me, it represents what we are, and we're not together. I think that we're all over the place. We have alliances, we shift, we change our minds, and it's not stable, even though democracy likes to think it is. And I think that coming back to the Black Lives Matter, I mean, you just look at what happened in the UK. I was like so happy. It's like, oh, okay, regardless if you're left wing or right wing, which really polarised people, it was about the fact that people could take up a bit of history and change it, throw it in the river. Yeah, if we look at Australia, it's so incredibly conservative, you can't even touch the monument. Yet, of course, there are histories, you know, where people have contested monuments, like in WA. People have put other plaques on there, etc. But I think that Australia is a very conservative place, and sometimes artists can only use photography the way in which that we're both using it, and many other artists to actually make some kind of comment. I think it's, yeah, not as powerful as movements overseas.
Kate, I'm going to ask you one final question, then we're going to open up to audience questions. We're not going to open it up to audience questions. We're going to, because we started late, we're going to not have that. Okay. Just got a very strong movement from our curator tonight. So, Kate, let's go back to that question of what is a monument, which you've both played with. And you particularly in showing us your Warrigal greens and asking the question, well, can a plant be a monument as well? But your Photo 21 work, it really focuses on that statue of Cook on his mighty plinth, yeah? And I'm interested in that rhetorical power of the statue. And again, in light of The Roads Must Fall and Black Lives Matter, do you think that statues are a thing of the past? As an historian, you know, I'm supposed to look back at the past, but I always actually find myself looking forward to the future and wondering how future generations are going to look back. And I'm wondering whether the statue is actually a colonial relic that one day we'll only remember through historical photographs like yours, because they've actually disappeared from the physical landscape. What will stand in place of statues and plinths? How are we going to remember and commemorate events and people without concrete and bronze and...
I don't think that monuments will all go. I think despite what we might want, or I think there's too much red tape and too much bureaucracy and too much police presence, as Brooke talked about the Cook statue earlier this year. I just can't see a place in the future where they won't be here. But I do feel that the memorial landscape can change, and I think it was 2017 I saw Genevieve Greaves and Tony Birch speak at Yirramboi Festival, and they were talking about that memorial landscape. I think there was an exhibition that Genevieve may have curated called Violence of Denial, and they were talking about that in that talk they were speaking about how an exhibition like that is actually more gets you thinking more than a monument does. The monuments are meant to keep a memory, but what is the memory? We don't really engage with it anyway. I mean, all you have to do, if you go to see my work, that there's 3 monuments in that park alone. And to be honest, I don't know any of those people, and I'm not going to go and research it. I don't care.
They're all old white blokes.
Well, this is what I was going to say, and to bring in your research, that Genevieve said in that talk, I think she had, audited in the city of Melbourne that there was over, I hope I'm quoting Genevieve correctly, but that there was over 500 monuments within the city of Melbourne and 510 to white men. So, I mean, it's not just about I know you have a very gender focus as well, but I feel that the work that Brooke did with Tanaminewe and Standing by Tanaminewe and Malbohina is an incredible monument, and that was made through so much consultation and through collaboration. That's what, if we're going to have any monuments in the future, that's what they need to be.
And if you go to the Monument of One's Own website, you will find all of those statistics and more about the actual gender composition and also the racial composition of statues in Melbourne. And I have Liv Kenny, who's here in the audience with us tonight, to thank for crunching the numbers on those things. So the breakdown is actually quite extraordinary. We have more statues of animals in Australia than we have of women. Only 3% of statues are of actual historical women. 3%, it's extraordinary. And then if you want to know how many are Indigenous women, obviously the number is even smaller. Thank you both for being with us tonight. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think you can see that we could continue with it, and I'm sure the audience are busting to ask their questions, but we do have to move on. And thank you both very much for being with us. Thank you all for coming out tonight as well. Thank you for your words, your art, your commitment. Thank you for your time and for braving our live event. Socially distanced and masked as it is. Thanks to M Pavilion and La Trobe University, who are partners of tonight's event. And I'd like to encourage you all to go and see Brooke and Kate's work, and also to view all of the artists' work in this fantastic Photo 21 exhibition. Thanks very much.